Wake up, it's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm Sam Sachs. Welcome to the Dang Friday show. It's the last stop before the weekend. And we begin in Washington, D.C., a city under occupation by the Trump administration and now stripped of its sanctuary status. Attorney General Pam Bondi tightened her grip on D.C. law enforcement, rescinding a number of laws passed by the city council to protect immigrant residents, including a measure that prohibited officers from inquiring about an individual's immigration status during stops, and one that blocked city officials from assisting federal immigration raids. And already there are reports of individuals getting arrested for minor crimes, like driving without a license, and then being turned over to immigration authorities for deportation. A curfew has also been put on the city, barring young people in D.C. from gathering in public places at night. A juvenile curfew zone was established in the Navy Yard area of D.C. beginning tonight. According to D.C. police, quote, persons 17 and under are prohibited from gathering in a group of 9 or more in any public place or on the premises of any establishment within the curfew zone. And a citywide juvenile curfew is in effect, prohibiting people under 17 from being out in public between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Feds are also ramping up homeless sweeps in D.C., bulldozing people's tents and belongings and arresting them if they refuse to leave. Advocacy groups had caught wind that a major sweep of the city's homeless would take place on Thursday night under the cover of darkness so that news cameras couldn't capture it. Some encampments were harassed, but the large-scale raid hasn't materialized yet as of this recording. A number of unhoused individuals were given notices by the city to leave by next Monday, giving them a few days of reprieve from a federal raid. But according to the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, there simply aren't enough services in D.C. to help people who are on the streets. The group said there are only about 40 shelter beds available for the roughly 900 homeless people sleeping outside. The executive director of the group, Amber Harding, said in a statement, quote, arresting people for no reason other than the fact that they have no home is inhumane and unjust. It is particularly cruel to do so, knowing that federal and local housing programs have been slashed and that D.C. does not have enough shelter beds. Homeless services in Washington were also limited by congressional Republicans deciding to slash over $1 billion from the local budget earlier this year for no reason whatsoever. Anyway, if you're troubled by what's happening in D.C., brace yourself, because it's likely coming to your city, too. Now to California, where Governor Gavin Newsom announced a retaliation plan against redistricting in Texas. President Trump asked his allies in Texas to do an unprecedented mid-decade redraw of the congressional maps. It's 5 years before the census in order to eliminate as many as 5 districts currently represented in Congress by Democrats. Newsom now says California will redraw maps too to eliminate Republican seats. The state currently has 52 seats in the House, 43 are represented by Democrats, but new maps could add another 5 Democratic seats. Here was the governor on Thursday justifying the new redistricting.
He doesn't play by a different set of rules. He doesn't believe in the rules. And as a consequence, we need to disabuse ourselves of the way things have been done. It's not good enough to just hold hands, have a candlelight vigil, and talk about the way the world should be. We have got to recognize the cards that have been dealt. And we have got to meet fire with fire.
Newsom is a massive scumbag, but that's good advice for a party addicted to losing. Unlike in Texas, California has independent redistricting commissions that draw lines in a nonpartisan way. So any new map would have to be approved by the legislature and put on the ballot for a popular vote in the state. Newsom announced that will happen in November. And if passed, the new maps would go into effect for the next 3 congressional elections in 2026, 2028, and 2030. After that, maps would be redrawn again by the state's independent commission based on the new census results. Newsom's announcement did catch the attention of the administration in Washington. Federal immigration agents swarmed Newsom's press conference as an act of intimidation and made at least one arrest of an individual. Yeah, extremely normal things happening within the American system of government. And finally, an executive order signed by President Trump this week instructs agencies to clear the way for space profiteers. The measure orders the Federal Aviation Administration to eliminate or reduce environmental reviews for launch and re-entry missions. It also requires the Commerce Secretary to investigate if state regulations are hindering the development of new commercial spaceports. And it creates a streamlined process for approving, quote, novel space activities, missions that aren't currently covered by existing regulations. All of this is a huge benefit to space billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Musk has blown up several rockets this year alone, causing environmental damage in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. He'd like to have blown up more by now. He's complained about red tape slowing down future disastrous launches. The executive order will boost for-profit space activities while also shifting the now reduced regulatory oversight of them from NASA to other departments like transportation and commerce. Here's how space.com described the change. Quote, the executive order signals a continued move toward commercially led space development, with new power centers emerging beyond NASA's control. Supporters see it as a chance to speed up innovation and clear the path for greater momentum in the private sector. But critics foresee an environmental disaster here. Jared Margolis, a senior attorney for the Center for Biological Diversity, told the outlet, quote, this reckless order puts people and wildlife at risk from private companies launching giant rockets that often explode and wreak devastation on surrounding areas. Bending the knee to powerful corporations by allowing federal agencies to ignore bedrock environmental laws is incredibly dangerous and puts all of us in harm's way. This is clearly not in the public's interest. Yeah, between this and the FAA deregulating drone use, allowing more commercial operators to fly them out of the line of sight, keep your heads up and on the lookout for shit falling out of the sky. This week, the Trump administration announced that not only will it reject a UN proposal to reduce emissions from global maritime shipping enterprises, it will also punish member states that support the initiative. The International Maritime Organization's Net Zero Framework requires member states to put emission limits on shipping vessels and to adopt new technology to reduce the demand of fossil fuels in the maritime industry. Currently, shipping accounts for about 3% of greenhouse gas emissions. 176 countries, including the US, belong to the IMO. The proposal is scheduled to be voted on in October. Trump already ordered the US to back out of the framework, just as he ordered the withdrawal of the Paris Climate Agreement. But in a joint statement released this week by the US Secretaries of State, Energy, Commerce, and Transportation, Washington went even further and threatened other countries that vote for the framework. The statement read, quote, the Trump administration unequivocally rejects this proposal before the IMO and will not tolerate any action that increases costs for our citizens, energy providers, shipping companies, and their customers or tourists. We will fight hard to protect the American people and their economic interests. Our fellow IMO members should be on notice that we will look for their support against this action and not hesitate to retaliate or explore remedies for our citizens should this endeavor fail. Retaliate how exactly? These are threats from a rogue state committed to remaining a world superpower, even if that world is scorched and ravaged. U.S. negotiators are also at work sabotaging a global treaty to reduce plastics pollution. According to a new draft released this week, the U.S. and other large oil-producing nations have succeeded in watering down the treaty to render it ineffective. The Associated Press reported that the document no longer includes limits on plastic production or bans on certain dangerous chemicals used in plastics. The U.S. has previously called such provisions red lines that it won't support. But most of the rest of the world is pissed that another effort to improve the planet for future generations is getting derailed by fossil fuel profiteers who control key governments, including the U.S. The delegation representing Colombia said the new draft lacked ambition and it couldn't support it. Canada's delegation said it is, quote, not acceptable for future generations. All right, time for today's main event. We received some strong nominations on Blue Sky. DC Mayor Muriel Bowser nominated for jaunting off to Martha's Vineyard amid the federal takeover of her city. Her office claims she was just picking her daughter up from an event there. I'm sure. Also nominated the Sackler family, which owns Purdue Pharmaceuticals and was responsible for fueling the opioid epidemic in the U.S. Family still refuses to admit it did anything wrong. In June, the family reached a more than $7 billion settlement with states for improperly marketing opioids to the public. And here's a nomination for Volusia County, Florida Sheriff Mike Chitwood, who is reportedly using bullying tactics to shake down the county for more money. He threatened to end all police services unless the county council approves of a new enhanced contract. Whoa, buddy. Don't threaten us with a good time. Thanks again for all the nominations. But in the end, this week's Rich Dick is FTC Chairman Andrew Ferguson. So right now, corporations are price gouging consumers and maximizing their profits. And the guy who should be cracking down on that behavior is Andrew Ferguson. But as you can probably guess from him being mentioned in this segment, he's not doing his job. Let's start with the latest release of the Producer Price Index, which measures wholesale prices. This week, it showed a dramatic rise in inflation. Analysts were projecting a 0.2% increase in July from the previous month. Instead, what they got, a 0.9% jump. That's the largest month-over-month hike since 2022 amid the last inflation surge. And both then and now, the price increases are due in large part not to external factors producers are facing, but internal ones. The mad drive for profits. Once again, we're seeing firms that are not affected by inflation or are at a minimum level using the cover of inflationary tariffs to increase prices and increase profits. Because the same PPI report that showed a big jump in prices also showed an increase in corporate profits, referred to as trade services, which increased 2%. Now, if you've been watching this show since the last inflation crisis, you know that the supply chain effects from the pandemic and the war in Ukraine were only a partial reason for price increases. A significant driver of inflation was actually price gouging, or what was referred to as greedflation. A report from the group Groundwork Collaborative estimated that greedflation accounts for more than half of price increases. But since the anchors over at CNBC don't watch this show, they were flummoxed by all this new data. Here's one guy who actually thought that corporate profits would decline because companies would eat some of the price increases of tariffs to keep prices low. Because he's a child, I guess.
There's an anomaly in the data here from what I thought was going to happen. I thought what was going to happen was this area called trade services to measure profit margins would squeeze and actually exert downward pressure on wholesale prices. I think that was an expectation across the street. But these are big numbers. Trade of private capital up 4.5%. Trade of personal consumption goods, what the margins that they're making, all of them up big. And I don't quite understand. And we've had a whole bunch of companies come on and say, we're taking big hits because of these tariffs. So this number should be going the other way. I'm not sure what's happening here.
Yeah, huge mystery what's happening here. Thankfully, one of the guests on the channel explained what was really going on. Here's former Treasury official Kitty Richards.
I'm actually not surprised that we didn't see compression of corporate profits. That's something that's characterized the inflationary period since the beginning of the pandemic, that corporations are actually able to protect their profit margins and actually even increase their profit margins at times using inflation and uncertainty as cover for price hikes, even if their costs aren't going up. And so one of the things we're going to be looking for in the CPI as consumer prices are starting to rise is, are corporations actually taking hits, or are they able to use this moment of supply constraint created by tariffs and uncertainty created by the Trump administration to pass on higher prices even above their increased costs?
And there it is. I mean, it's not a huge mystery. Corporations have been admitting to doing this stuff on earnings calls with investors. And this can happen because markets tend to be dominated by oligopolies that have a lot of pricing power, and they know their customers don't really have anywhere else to go. Which brings us back to Andrew Ferguson. When Trump embarked on his trade wars back in April, Ferguson warned on Twitter that he'll be watching closely to make sure American companies are vigorously competing on prices and that tariffs shouldn't be a green light to fix prices. Well, not watching too closely, because this week Ferguson's boss, President Trump, repealed an executive order signed by former President Biden that attempted to break up concentrated markets and reduce companies' pricing power to do things like use the cover of tariffs to price gouge customers. That Biden order, for example, instructed the FTC to increase enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act and other laws that break up monopolistic power. But it's gone now, and Ferguson, who is far more loyal to Trump than U.S. consumers, applauded the repeal. In a statement, he claimed, quote, "America's markets are the most dynamic on earth, responsible for enriching the entire world through technological innovations, lifting countless people out of poverty and inspiring other countries to emulate our economic system. Our markets thrive when they operate freely and when the federal government does not pick winners and losers, but allows businesses to grow and innovate." Oh, shut the fuck up. Enough with the market mythology. Just say corporations should be able to do whatever they want, Andrew. Just say you think greedflation is good. A new report from Public Citizen shows that Ferguson and other market regulators have totally abandoned their jobs. In just 6 months, federal enforcement actions have been dropped against 165 companies that were investigated for wrongdoing. And instead of following through on those enforcement actions, Ferguson is working to ensure that freight trucks in California can spew as much pollution as they want. The FTC struck a deal with trucking companies in the state, allowing them to ignore state regulations aimed at reducing trucking emissions down to zero. Ferguson said in a statement, quote, efforts by states to ban gas and diesel-powered vehicles, such as California's Clean Truck Partnership, will weaken our economy and leave Americans poorer and less safe. Well, buddy, wait until you see how poor and unsafe Americans are when global temperature increases exceed 2 or even 3 degrees Celsius. It sucks that we went from an aggressive regulator in Lena Khan at the FTC to now this stooge, this sycophant for the ruling class. Andrew Ferguson, you are this week's Rich Dick. All right, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise from Pennsylvania. It was sent in by Randy in Pittsburgh. Enjoy. Thank you, Randy. That's the show. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Find more MMN at means.tv. We also have a YouTube and podcast channel, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. One day, capitalism will fall. Till then, we'll be right here. See you next week.